I was actually kind of terrified at some of the things that had been left in that script because they felt a little edgy for what we knew had to be a PG-13 Batman movie. And so it was one of those sort of be careful what you wish for moments. I remember calling Chris and calling Jordan, one of our friends and one of the producers on the movie, to say, I just want to know what Heath sounded like. I was like, what's he doing with it? Right? The character had been in my head for so long that you're sort of going, okay, well, where are we going to take this?
Prepare your ears, humans. Happy, Sad, Confused begins now.
I'm Josh Horowitz, and today on Happy, Sad, Confused, for nearly 25 years, Jonathan Nolan has made some of my favorite film and TV shows. Let's talk WESTWORLD, MEMENTO, The Dark Knight, and now Fallout. It is my obsession. It will soon be your obsession. It brings Jonah Nolan to Happy, Sad, Confused at last.
Thank you, Josh.
It's good to see you, man.
25 years, shit, I feel old.
Well, I feel, by the way, I'm your future. I'm basically 2 months, almost to the day, older than you. Today's my birthday,
kidding.
Actually. You're my birthday
You're
gift.
looking better preserved than I am. Happy birthday.
Stop it. Thank you, man. Thank you. I'm your ghost of Christmas future. This is what 48 looks like.
Oh, dear. Well, you're pulling it off with a plum.
Congratulations, man. We're going to talk a lot of things today. Fallout, first and foremost. But by the way, when I did my research before chatting with you today, and we've chatted before, but never like this kind of long form thing, you haven't done a lot of this kind of thing, like the long form, like
sit down interview.
Yeah.
No.
What's up with that?
I've managed to elude it to this point. Somehow I didn't manage to duck your phone calls. No, I think part of the reason I'm behind the camera is I don't like the focus on me so much. I like I like to let the stories kind of do the talking. And frankly, I'm not sure I'm as interesting as the subjects that I've been lucky enough to work on.
Okay, I'll be the judge. We'll circle back at the end.
We'll see.
Think of this as like a free therapy session.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, we made even more than 45 minutes in that case, Josh. We're in for it now.
Okay, let's first talk Fallout. As if you couldn't tell, we're talking Fallout today.
We are here we are in the post-apocalypse.
This is a wild show, and I come at this, frankly, as I'm not really a gamer. I don't really know the game. But it is I always talk about on the podcast liking big swings. Mm-hmm. This is a big fucking swing.
It is a big swing. Yeah, it's a big swing.
There are a lot of tones here that you kind of have to figure out. I don't know. When I was writing my notes, I'm like, it's Mad Max. No, it's horror. It's like Joe Dante horror. No, it's Jetsons. It's so many different things.
Yeah.
I mean, you've tackled some really big properties before. Westworld, Batman. Does this feel like as big a swing as you've ever taken?
Yeah, definitely. Without a doubt. It reminds me the most, and I've talked a little bit about this before, of where we sat in the Batman universe, not just in terms of the fan base, the amount of people who are obsessed with these games. And that's where it started for me, was playing the games with no eye towards adapting them, just as a fan, as a gamer. I used to be a gamer, now I got kids, so they
something has to give in that game.
Something has to give.
Yeah.
The gaming was the thing that went away. It's a big swing. It's a big swing. We like big swings. I knew the games. I knew them from playing them myself. It reminded me the most, and I think one of the things I was excited about sitting down with Todd Howard for the first time, as a fan of what he did, he wanted to meet with me because he liked my work and I liked his, and walked out of that meeting with a handshake deal to make this series. In part because when you're looking for adaptations, and about half of my career has been adaptation and half of it has been original.
Sure.
I like them both. When you're looking for an adaptation, you want something with great substance. You want something that has something essential and something that's irreplaceable. Otherwise, why not just do your own thing? But you also want something that has a little bit of freedom, I think, for me. Not for everyone. And some people enjoy the more rigorous, translation form of adaptation where you're really just bringing it to the screen. But for us, I've always had a restlessness to me that I'm looking for things where there's some latitude to do some storytelling, where there's something that's incomplete from the original medium, or just the awareness that you're not necessarily honoring something by just faithfully recreating it and adding images to it.
Right.
I've always been a little uncomfortable with that version of it. There's some fantastic adaptations that have been incredibly faithful. I think of the Lord of the Rings movies, which are so beautifully made and such a landmark achievement. For me, it's a slightly more dysfunctional thing of wanting to be in conversation with the thing that I'm adapting.
It does feel like this, again, not knowing the game so much from what I gather, it feels like you have the world, you have the feel, you have what you're going after in terms of like that really complex blend of tones. Yeah. And that gives you license then to kind of fill in the gaps and create characters that can play in this mad universe.
100%. And the unique challenge but opportunity with Fallout was every game in the franchise has been in a different city with a different set of characters.
Right.
They all connect to each other. They're all in this larger universe with a consistent set of events, but they're all quite different. It's the sort of blind man with the elephant, right? You're telling this story discreetly. And so it felt like a perfect, and from that very first conversation with Todd, the undertaking and the understanding for both of us, what he wanted and what I wanted, totally in line. We wanted an original story set within this larger universe, which is exactly how they approach every franchise, every entry in the franchise. But even beyond that, the nature of the game itself. So there's some games that are, and there's some great games, that are basically just movies with playable bits. Right? And you feel the style of the storytelling there goes in that direction. And then there are games, and the games that Cards on the Table I'm more drawn to, are these open world games. Role-playing games in which part of it is you're cultivating your character and you can take them in different directions. And there's not just in terms of their skill set, not in terms of the attributes, you're going to be a little sneakier, you're going to be a little bigger, stronger, aggressive, intelligent, but also the moral complexity of it. You can play these games as a good guy the whole way through, or you can play them as a heel the whole way through and have a very different experience and a different ending, depending on how you go about it. You choose a different faction. So not only are each of the games different, your version of playing one of the games would be totally different than my version.
Right.
And what that opens up, one, it makes for an incredibly engaging game, one that I played through, wound up kind of obsessed with Fallout 3, which is the first time I'd experienced the franchise. You play it through, as I often do with these sorts of games. I play it as a good guy first, because I feel like my parents are somewhere watching, right, judging me.
Right.
And then play it again, trying to be the bad guy, but kind of failing and getting squeamish and winding up maybe somewhere like, ham-fistedly in the middle, Breaking Bad a little bit, but then trying to salvage it somewhere. To do honor to that is to reflect on the very openness of that. And so while there's canon here, there's no canonical version of each of the games. They're different for everyone who played them. And the invitation there was extraordinary on that level, because here you have this beautiful world with all this incredible work. You're standing on the shoulders, as we were with Batman, and in a weird way, wound up in a similar place to Batman, where there were so many different versions of Batman that when you sat down to do it, you say, okay, we're going to be faithful to which version of it. They're the core pieces of the canon that you need to honor. But beyond that, you were sort of free to create, and that's part of what's exciting about this. Working with Geneva and Graham, working with our showrunners, was the ability to create within a universe where you already have all of this incredible thought, all this beautiful design that's gone into it. And so it's like being a kid in a candy store. You have all these amazing things that you get to play with, but you also get to come in and add some of your own ideas and thoughts, some of the things that you're worrying about, having nightmares about, or fantasizing about, gets to sort of play a role in where the narrative goes.
Well, again, there are a lot of different ways avenues to go down here, but like one of the things that resonated with me, and again, we're basically the same age, like I grew up loving the work of Paul Verhoeven, and there's a little bit of like the gonzo horror, sci-fi, political satire in this. Is that something that was on your mind? Did Verhoeven make a difference in your life?
100%. I remember listening to my brothers watching RoboCop because I was too shit scared. I think when that film came out, we were probably like
11,
10
87,
or 11.
yeah, I think,
87. I remember the scene where he gets his hand shot off.
Yeah.
Give the man a hand, right?
Yeah.
Just being like, what the fuck is happening? It was where I checked out.
Totally.
It took me another few months to come back and watch the rest of it. For some reason, there's been a lot of online chatter recently that I've seen about Starship Troopers, right? Sort of reevaluating in the context of, our total shit show of a modern world and trying to understand Verhoeven's intent in there,
right,
in terms of what's he saying with these things. One of the things I find very annoying about this sort of interrogation of filmmakers is trying to pin them down to like, what do you mean exactly, right?
Well, this happened with Dark Knight Rises, as I recall.
Well, the Dark Knight in particular. Dark Knight was something that everyone on the political spectrum decided was an apologia for either their side or the other side, depending how annoyed they were by the movie.
Yeah.
I remember reading how we were an apologist for George Bush. I'm just like, okay. No, it's there's a level of discomfort that people have with movies and TV shows that they don't have with novels, where it's like, you better make it very clear. We don't like this political ambiguity. Where are you in this thing? Whereas I think, look, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Like, I think that, I have more questions than answers. And I'm more comfortable asking questions than I am answers. One of the things that was exciting to us about Fallout is I think people tend to think especially maybe non-gamers, tend to think of gaming as this kind of like somewhat sort of soft conservative in the sense that not risk-taking
Right.
storytelling format, where it's all kind of nice and I think in the late 2000s, when someone would ask me, hey, what was your favorite movie from the year? As often as not, my answer would be a game. There was a period there in gaming, and Fallout, for me, one of the most notable, but you had other games like BioShock and Portal and all these games that were really challenging the medium, but also taking risks with storytelling that kind of made the movie makers look a little wimpy in comparison, right? Really bold. But the money hadn't quite taken in yet. It hadn't quite, all these businesses, as soon as there's enough money on the line, you start to get a little conservative. Todd's always been pretty much, out there on the bleeding edge of these things. But the games from the beginning, even before Todd got involved with the franchise, Tim Kaine onwards, the very first game. I mean, Graham jokes about the fact the first game could have been written by adbusters, right? These are political stories. These are, in many ways, firebrand storytelling. They have things to say about America. They have things to say about, or rather, and the thing I'm most comfortable with, they have questions to ask about the end of the world and our place in it and what happens to all these cultural institutions. And one of the things that was so exciting to me playing the game for the first time is you're aware of, is it going to be Mad Max? Is it, you're aware of what the apocalypse is supposed to look like. And this completely resists that.
Right.
It's not about absence and spareness and vacancy. It is for a minute. And then you realize that this world is heavily populated. There are lots of people left over. And this is Lucy's experience coming to the surface in our show. Coming out there thinking, it's going to be hearts and minds. There'll be a handful of starving kids left, and I'm going to organize them into a 4-H group, and we're going to learn how to plant corn. And then being blindsided by the fact that we weren't waiting for you guys down in your luxury vaults. That the world has moved on.
Right.
That it has begun to rebuild itself in different ways. That there are different factions that have gone in different directions. That it is in many ways more complicated than the world that was wiped away. And the complexity of that, to me, was so fascinating in terms of the questions it gets to ask about where we're headed, where this is all going.
Look, guys, there are some things in life you should compromise on and some things you should never, ever, ever compromise on. Sure, compromise on that overpriced health food store because it's convenient. That's fine, I get it. But never, ever compromise when it comes to your health. Instead, check out ZocDoc. It's the place where you can find and book doctors who will make you feel comfortable, listen to you, and yes, prioritize your health. You can search by location, availability, and insurance. So literally, there are no compromises here because with ZocDoc, you've got more options than you know. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare highly rated in-network doctors near you and instantly book appointments with them online. That instant part is super important to me because I don't know about you, but I have spent countless hours of my life begging for the next available appointment with a doctor I'm not even sure I want to see. But these doctors are ones you want to see. They are verified by actual real patients. That's right, verified reviews. Plus, you can filter specifically for doctors who take your insurance, are located near you, and treat basically any condition that you're searching for. If I needed a doctor, I would use ZocDoc. Go to ZocDoc.com/happysad and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/happysad. ZocDoc.com/happysad.
Can we talk a little bit about, we mentioned Verhoeven, but I'd be curious to hear some of the other influences growing up. I've had Chris on the show a few times, so I picked his brain a bit, but I know there's a bit of an age gap.
Yes,
Again, I relate.
he's much older.
My brother, who's a writer as well, is 5 years older than me, so I do feel like very kind of close.
Those guys are like boomers. Right?
Well, no, I will say I'll give Adam Horowitz credit. He introduced me to a lot of the film and TV that I loved. Was Chris the biggest influence on your
very much
early taste?
It's just there's the little brother thing, right? Like thank God he had good taste, because that's what I was stuck with. But there was a fun moment where, because we sort of grew up together, but we kind of didn't grow up together.
Right.
He went to boarding school in the UK, and I went to high school. Everyone always asks about the accents first.
Sure.
Two parents, happily married, American mom, English dad. He caught the English leg of the world tour, and I caught the North American leg. And we were always friendly, but became closer a little later in my childhood.
Right.
He'd been at boarding school, the whole time. And I think it was part of when I'm probably in my early teens when he came home one summer and realized that I had a sense of humor, that we shared a sense of humor. One of the things about Chris that is starting just in the last year or two to get a little more apparent is how much of a sense of humor the guy is. I think of the films as very serious, but we have been cracking each other up for many, many years. We also didn't have a lot of points in comparison in our lives, right? Like he went to English high school and college, and he never took the SAT. I never took the A levels. So we were able to kind of bond across those things. But culturally speaking, for me, as with any little brother, right? You start out sort of drafting off of their taste, then try to define your own, sometimes in opposition to theirs, or in our case, kind of reaching out like little cultural magpies, and he would find this thing over here, and I would find this other thing over here, and kind of bring it back. You're never as proud as you are as a little brother when you found
your
something.
Own thing, yeah, right.
Found your own thing, but something that your brother kind of goes, oh, that's actually kind of cool.
Right. Is there an example you can think of? Because I know his, he talks obviously Ridley Scott, the Bond movies, Star Wars, and these are you can't avoid these things in a young man's life, a young person's life.
Yeah, 100%. I'm trying to think of films that I brought to his attention. Our tastes are similar but divergent. All of the above, everything there. And I've had the pleasure of going to watch, when I was a kid, he would occasionally take me down to watch, when I was little, we'd go down and watch films in Leicester Square in London, right? Wow. Which is the great sort of, nightlife hub of yore in London. And it has 3 terrific movie theaters there. We've had the privilege of having premieres at a couple of them over the years. But I remember going down to watch, I think we went down to watch, what was the Tom Cruise movie? Was it Legend?
Yeah, the Ridley Scott, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Chris was obsessed with Ridley Scott from a young age. We went down to watch Legend, and I think we were on the way, and The Goonies was playing at the Empire. And I had the temerity to suggest that we go watch The Goonies, which was roundly shot down.
But if you want, has been kind to you, sir. I mean, respect to Legend, but
yeah, if you wanted to point to a sort of a gentle tug, one brother or the other, right? I'm like, let's go watch The Goonies.
Right.
Legend is a really cool movie with some beautiful sequences in it. But I think if you had to sort of look, the continental divide there, the subtle continental divide, because it's more in common than not.
Right.
But that moment where I'm like, what about that one? Might illuminate it better than anything else.
So when for you did obsession with film and TV turn from obsession into I'd like to try my hand at this?
It's complicated, right? So if your older brother wants to do the same thing, there's a period of time in which you're like, well, I don't want anything to do with that shit. Sure. And from the beginning of my life, Chris has been making movies. He started making movies with our dad's Super 8 camera at my mom's behest. She always likes to point out it was her idea. There's a moment like this in Spielberg's in the wonderful Spielberg movie.
The Fablemans, yeah.
Meet the Fablemans.
Yeah.
Similar moment, right? It's the mom who's at their wit's end, where it's like, what the fuck am I going to do with these kids in a rainy day in England, and gives them the film camera. Chris goes from that point onwards, and so when I turned up 6 years later, he was already making films, and so my earliest memories, literally, are of helping or hindering Chris making stop motion movies in the basement. So film was always his thing. I realized fairly early on, and I fought it as long as I could. Again, as a little brother, you kind of look where everyone's going. The English degree felt like the family curse. And so I wanted to have, and I think my mom encouraged me to try to have something. Chris knew from the beginning he wanted a film director. Our dad was self-employed, he was a copywriter, and I think my mom was eager to have someone else in the family who had a steady paycheck. And so I was encouraged to look at other things, and I think by myself I was looking at other things. And I went to college originally to get a foreign service degree, and thinking I would work for the government. Not a great idea. And at some point in there, I had to take some time off, and I just realized that the thing that had always bailed me out of everything, right? I wasn't a terribly good student, was writing. Whatever the subject was, I would sort of get by at the last minute by putting a few pretty words together and making it look like I knew what I was talking about. And I had fought it for so long that when I realized that writing was really the thing that I was best at and I found most rewarding, that then I took some time off college. I took a semester off and came back and got an English degree. And as part of that English degree, there were screenwriting classes, and I was drawn to them out of interest in the subject. Chris, at the time, was starting to shoot his first full-length feature, Following, which part of that time that I took off, I wound up working as a grip on the set, helping out. It was all friends and family making it and putting it together, and I came back from that experience interested in filmmaking, I think for the first time, looking at what Chris was doing and saying, oh, it's kind of interesting. And it was that summer. It all happened quite rapidly. I changed my degree, or rather, stepped away from school, took a semester off, realized that I probably needed to concentrate on the writing thing, and that was probably where my calling was. And then in the course of that, the traveling that I did that summer, while Chris was making Following, I had this idea for a story about a guy who, I'd gotten interested in antegrade amnesia because it's something it's not a very common condition, but it's something that they talk about a lot in Psych 101, which I had just taken because it's so illuminating about the human mind, the fragility of the human mind. So I had this idea for a story about a guy who couldn't remember anything, took to tattooing the clues on his body. But right from the beginning, I remember feeling almost annoyed. I sat down to write it. I was very interested in it. I sat down to write it, and I thought, oh, shit, okay, this is the wrong, inspiration coming to the wrong brother, right? This is a visual story, and I'm going to write a cool story out of it. But it really is inherently visual. Like, it'd be so much more efficient to just show this guy taking his shirt off and realizing with kind of horror that he's turned himself into a canvas of evidence. This kind of futile, almost, whimsical quest to try for someone who's profoundly incapable of holding on to information to try to track down someone, and a revenge story. And so when we drove out, Chris was moving to, Emma was already there, Chris was moving out to LA finally, and I've been sort of pestering him to make the move. We were both born with American citizenship, so I was like, you gotta come over, man, don't be in England, it's not. So we drove my dad's car out together, because I had it in DC, it was just racking up parking tickets. And I was like, look, I've heard in LA you need a car. So I picked him up in Chicago, and we made the rest of the drive. And halfway through it, he was talking about the films that he wanted to make, and I'll leave it to his next sit down with you to talk about the films he would have made otherwise. One of them was a comedy, which is exciting. And it's exciting for me with Fallout, because it's a chance to finally circle back, do something that's a little closer to comedy than anything we've worked on before. But in that moment, we got to Minnesota and ran out of things to say to each other. I pitched him the story for Memento, and he got really quiet. And I knew it's this little brother thing, right? When I'd show up with a piece of music or a movie or something that he hadn't found, usually the relationship was so one-sided that when you showed up with something and you realized, oh shit, this is kind of cool, they get a little quiet. I knew with Chris I had him with that one, because the story was inherently visual, inherently cinematic. And so I went back to college and started taking screenwriting classes, and he took my early sketches for the story and started developing a screenplay out of it. By the time I graduated, he'd written the script, put the finances together, and we went straight into it.
So long story short, it becomes a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Oscar-nominated screenplay, and it sets you both on this amazing path that we're continuing to talk about to this day.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you know what the path was after that? Did you have a sense of what you wanted to do with your career?
No, we had, and it was the classic kind of overnight success where, by the time we'd shot the film with Guy Pearce, Chris and Emma put this amazing cast together, and made the movie. And I thought, God, everyone, I'd been in LA for all of 6 months. I'd worked on the production. I wanted to get to know how production worked. And we got to the end of it, and I thought, why does everyone complain about Hollywood? This is easy. We showed up, we had a good idea for a movie, we made a good movie.
Yeah.
And then we tried to sell it, because we had debt financed it with foreign pre-sales. So it was going to get released, and it was released ultimately in the UK first, and France, and all these other territories. The profit was supposed to come for our partners and financiers, supposed to come from the North American distribution rights, theatrical distribution. So we screened it for everyone all on the same day, March of 2000. I took Chris out for steak. Emma went to one screening. The Todd sisters went to another. Aaron Ryder, our producer, went to a third. And they called me on my old Nokia cell phone. Chris and I were waiting for the hosannas.
That's what Chris is still using, by the way, I think.
Chris officially doesn't have a cell phone, right? It was always me and Emma were the ones, the saps who had to carry the cell phone around. Whenever someone got word that you were close to Chris, your phone would start ringing with calls for him. The calls came in and no one wanted to buy it. Started with Harvey Weinstein and all the rest of the...
Is this after Venice? This is after it's already screened? Or
before Venice.
Got it.
This was the first time we showed it really to anyone. We showed it to some family members, and they thought it was cool, right? We screened it for all these movie theaters, and we get completely blanked, right? No one wanted it. And the response from all of them was, oh, I thought it was great. Okay, well, how much do you want to offer, right? We would have taken, at this point, not a lot of money. And the answer was, well, no, I get it, but the audience won't get it. And there was such contempt for the audience. This is really what motivated a lot of my career and a lot of the way I've approached my career. There's such contempt for the audience. That the audience was a bunch of fucking idiots, right? That they wouldn't get it. And I thought to myself, God, I've met some of these executives. Like, they're not. What makes you think you're that much smarter than the audience? Because you're not.
Right.
And we really felt from the beginning, and growing up together, watching all these weird movies together, and weird shows, that the audience was really, really smart, and really well versed, or at least there'd be enough of the audience that was bored with what they were being served for a movie of a budget that small.
Yeah.
There might be enough people that you'd recoup your money on that, who wanted to watch something that was a little more lean in, that was a little more, pay attention. This is before the whole second screen experience, right? To your point, is Nokia is only so much entertainment you get from it. You go to a movie theater, you're watching the movie. It's too dark to read a book. You're watching the movie. And we thought there were enough people in the world who'd want to watch a movie that made them do a little work that we'd be able to get by. But at first, in that first moment, we spent the next 6 months before Venice, from that moment till Venice. Part of what was going on in the background, I started writing a resume. I was like, oh shit, okay, well I guess this didn't work out. And I started trying to figure out, I made a promotional website for Memento because we didn't have enough money. I taught myself how to code in JavaScript and Flash. I'd taken part of that return to college was learning some coding, and so made that themselves. And I was getting by making promotional websites for other movies. And then we went to Venice. And that was the first time that we had shown, we did the festival circuit. What had happened in the background, as we were taking it to festivals, Steven Soderbergh somehow had watched a print of this thing and started going to parties and just ridiculing movie executives about, have you seen this movie that none of you wanted to fucking buy?
Right.
If we can't put this movie into the world, then we've failed as a business. I mean, Steven was an incredible evangelist on behalf of that film. And so we went to Venice. That was the first time we showed it to anyone who we weren't related to, other than the muckety mucks who'd passed on it. And had this extraordinary reaction to it, and kind of knew that it validated our impulse, Chris's instinct, our instinct from the beginning, that there was an audience out there who really wanted to watch things that were a little more lean in, a little more complicated.
And the validation is in literally both of your works to this day. Whether you look at Westworld or Oppenheimer, they're all films that demand more of an audience and know that the audience is, with quality storytelling, is willing to put in the work.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think that has always been our guide, right? It's always been this moment of you trust the audience is looking for something more involved, more complicated. Yeah. And that's been a hallmark of everything we've done since.
Even though we have a lot of time, I can't believe this. I'm going to skip by Prestige. We're going to do that the next time because the Prestige I love, and I know it has a
My
special
first professional
place.
gig, yeah.
I'm obsessed with it. We'll save it for next time because we have to talk Dark Knight a bit. So as I understand it, David Goyer and Chris do the first pass on that. They do the story basically, and then it's your time to do the first draft of it. So this is the introduction of the Joker. This is Heath Ledger. Now, was Heath in mind at that point? Like when they bring the story to you, does Chris say, I think this could be Heath Ledger?
I'm trying to remember when that conversation took place. I don't think so. I think that the story such as it was it sort of started out fairly detailed, and then it kind of got more abstruse, and we got to the third act, and there was kind of a hand wave, and it was and then he rides off from the sunset. It was kind of it wasn't fully fleshed out, as it shouldn't be, right? Like, it's kind of I think it's a mistake to try to be that prescriptive at that stage. So it was like a loose set, what I was presented with was a handful of index cards on a board that Chris kind of walked me through. We're here's where we start, we get to this, and we get to that. And then he went off to make The Prestige. I had worked on Batman Begins. I'd worked on Batman Begins from an early stage. Chris had gone off and was into prep. We were going to make The Prestige. Jeff Robinoff was running Warner's at the time, really, the sort of godfather of those early projects with us at Warner Brothers. And Jeff was nervous that Chris needed more time to prep the film. And so I got called in, and I think Jeff said to my brother at one point, he's like, well, you like working with your brother. Why don't we'll happily pay for your brother to be with you and work on this thing. So I sort of came in as a consultant and worked on that. But wound up living in a hotel in London for months and months and months trying to help figure out how this thing would work. Because Chris had so much on his plate figuring out all of the prep, all the cars, all the stuff, all that amazing world building that he was doing. And so when we came to The Dark Knight, for me, from my perspective, having kind of been, having spent the time of the first film, I think Chris was somewhat reluctant to do it, which is why I don't think the casting conversation started in earnest before I'd gone off to write a draft. He was making The Prestige, and he was, frankly, unsure about whether he wanted to make another Batman movie, right? I don't think he wanted to repeat himself. And I think he was he was very satisfied with the film he made. I think he was very proud of Batman Begins. I was as well, but from my perspective, I was like, it's like we've made this sports car. It's like we've built this sports car,
Right.
and don't you want to take it for a drive?
Right.
The first film, 59 minutes of it, is origin mythos. The film is called Batman Begins.
Yeah.
I'm like, don't you want to? So for me, the challenge, I felt, it felt clear to me that Chris was on the fence about making another movie. And so I felt with that first draft, it was kind of on me to prove.
Proof of concept. This is worth doing. Yeah.
Part of the early conversations were a subtle shift in genre. If Batman Begins is a classic adventure, we call it a comic book movie, but there's a lot of different comic books.
Sure.
It's an adventure film. It's, it's him traveling around the world and finding himself and trying to figure out how does he respond to this terrible thing that's happened to him. What is he going to become? Second film was a genre shift into a urban crime film.
Right.
And that to me was so exciting to take the same characters, the same actors, the same story, but shift it now into something that was more in the mold of, and I remember clear as a bell, I didn't see it with Chris, but we did see it the same year when Michael Mann's film Heat came out. And I went and saw it at McClurg Court in Chicago, opening weekend. And fully a third of the audience walked out. It was so loud, that gunfight in the middle of it was so loud. That movie made such an impression on me.
Yeah.
In terms of, and it's another thing that I recommended to Chris years later was The Wire. I'd watched the first season. He had not. It was one of those little brother victories, right? Where it's like, you really should check us out. And he winds up very much in the same spirit as Heat. You had this fully naturalistic world.
Right.
And by the end, it's a Greek opera. And you don't quite, that's a bit of a magic trick with Michael Mann, and then again with The Wire, with David Simon, this ability to, every beat feels plausible and real, keenly observed and naturalistic. But by the end, you've seen a Greek opera. There's been this invisible movement into something more operatic, more tragic. And so that feeling of, could we take the feeling of Heat? Could you take the feeling of something? And The Wire, I think, was running at the same time. So it was very much, we hadn't gotten to Omar yet, but there was very much Omar in the back, you sort of concurrently looking at that and feeling, could you bring that feeling into the Batman universe? Could you tell a story in that key? And that to me, that early draft, for me, it was a bit of a, this is what I think a Batman movie should be, right? I had no imagining at that stage. Chris was off working on The Prestige. I was sort of left by myself with this thing, not really knowing how the third act should work. And to me, it was a bit of a challenge, a gauntlet. It was like, that's what I think a Batman movie should be. Chris came back, and I think somewhere along the lines convinced himself that, okay, we're going to take this gamble. We'll go back and do it one more time. And that's when the conversation started in earnest. To my great horror, they started making the movie, and almost nothing had been cut out of the script. It was pretty much exactly, Chris had taken a pass, as he always done, and added some beautiful ideas to it. And then we started talking together as we got closer to it about, okay, ideas like the Joker's multiple
origins and
backstory. But I was actually kind of terrified at some of the things that had been left in that script because they felt a little edgy for what we knew had to be a PG-13 Batman movie. And so it was one of those sort of be careful what you wish for moments. I remember calling down the first day on set. I wasn't on set. And that's part of the reason I started doing television is I missed being on set. There's nothing for me to do. No desire to be on set when there's no job for me to do on set. There's nothing worse than being on set and just standing around with nothing to do. I remember calling Chris and calling Jordan, one of our friends and one of the producers on the movie, to say, I just want to know what Heath sounded like. I was like, what's he doing with it? Right? The character had been in my head for so long that you're sort of going, okay, well, where are we going to take this? An amazing experience.
Happy, Sad, Confused is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you sleep a little more? Would you visit a friend? Would you read a book? Most of us spend our lives thinking about having extra time, but the real question we should be asking ourselves is time for what? What would you use if you had unlimited time? Therapy can help decide what to use that time for, what's important in your life. I've benefited from therapy, friends have too. If you're looking to start therapy, BetterHelp is there for you. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and flexible and suited to your busy schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. Plus, they have flexibility. Think about that. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Therapy is invaluable in these stressful times. Give BetterHelp a try. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/HSC today to get 10% off your first month. That's right. BetterHelp, HELP.com/HSC. Give therapy a try.
Did you ever advocate for any villains we didn't see? Like, because there were all those rumors, as you well know, in that time that Warner Brothers was pushing Leonardo to play the Riddler in Dark Knight Rises, what became Dark Knight Rises. Do you remember those conversations, or did you have a horse in that race saying, like, Hugo Strange or Penguin or Riddler? Like, did that ever get to a point where you felt strongly about a villain?
Yeah, we had these conversations. Bane came out of a conversation with David and Chris. I was unsure about that at the story stage, but sort of, really kind of look. It's backseat driving, right? You're looking at it. I think Chris understood that he didn't want to go. What we had done with, and what Heath had done with that character, you didn't want to go anywhere near it. I sort of started to play with ideas about the Riddler and what could be done with that character, but it did feel like it was close enough to the space of what we'd done with Heath that you really needed. Right. To sort of, and again, there's another genre shift there, right? And I think one of the things I was excited about with The Dark Knight Rises was, okay, if you did this, this kind of urbane crime drama for the second film. The third one was, and we sort of find ourselves back in this space, it was a post-apocalyptic film. Right. That was what I was excited about with that film, was the idea that you'd sort of go there, right? In Batman, it's always about, Batman always saves the day, the city always survives, and there have been some examples in the comic books where they'd just kind of gone for it a little bit. And I thought, well, why can't we do that with a movie? Why can't we destroy Gotham and see what happens afterwards?
In your head canon, after that last shot, and I love the ending of Dark Knight Rises, how soon does John Blake pick up the mantle? Does he get into that Bat costume pretty quickly?
Yeah, it's a fun one. I think there's always a need. The idea there of being that and look, you can talk about the politics of Batman. That's a complicated question, but that idea in that universe that there's a need for a hero, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But yeah, in my imagination, maybe it takes a little bit of a moment to kind of figure out exactly, or waits for the first clear evidence that maybe the police aren't going to be able to handle something by themselves, and then right. picks up the mantle reluctantly. We've always liked the idea of Batman as a kind of a reluctant hero.
I mean, both you and Chris have a real way with endings, like really leaving the theater, leaving a TV show, just feeling like satisfied and answering some questions but begging some more.
Yeah.
I would imagine, like, on the flip side, is there a sense of like, oh, we never got the closure on Westworld? Like,
yeah.
Where are you at on that? I mean, I guess that ship has just sailed. We're never going to see more. Or
I don't know. Evan's still around. I'm a bit of a completionist. No, I think you have to be. Look, you have to deal with the reality that sometimes you don't always get to, in television in particular. These are long haul things. We worked on Westworld for 8 years, 4 seasons, with a plan from the beginning and an idea of where we wanted to take the story. But I think largely more than anything else, gratitude for what we got to do. Yeah. Right from the beginning, the first season was tough. I mean, this has been covered before, but it was the first piece of science fiction that HBO had done, really, I think ever. And so there were some, with that original regime that hired us, that bought the pitch, there was some real hand-wringing over, what the show could be. They had some ideas of what they wanted it to be, and we eventually came to loggerheads and had to shut down and had to sit there and cut and figure it out and have the confidence and the faith in ourselves and what we'd made. And then eventually Casey Bloys took over the network and came in. He came to us and watched 5 episodes. He was like, I don't get it. It's great. Let's go. And we went back to work. But there was a lesson there.
Right.
I think I've had a bit of a charmed life in film and television. My first series, Person of Interest, we got a chance to determine our own fate. There was a moment where we were told, the great Peter Roth came to us and said, look, if you make it a little more procedural, if you make it more case a week, it'll probably go for 7 or 8 seasons. But I like what you guys are doing, so you know, you guys do what you want to do. And we got a chance to finish that story, which I was very proud of. With Westworld, we knew from the first season onwards, this was a big swing. And so you better make each season count. You better make each season tell a complete story, settle your debts, and walk away. And if there's a chance to go back and tell more of the story, great. So if we never get a chance to do it, the experience of making that show was such an extraordinary one. That cast, that crew, that collaboration with me and Lisa and all the rest of the amazing people that we got a chance to work with, very, very special. If there was a chance to go back and do it again, I'd jump all over it.
One of the treats of this is the first 3 episodes you've directed
Yeah.
And you haven't directed a ton. You've directed a little Westworld, a little Person of Interest, and I'm frankly a bit surprised by that. Is that an ambition? Is there a Jonah Nolan feature directing project that you want to get off the ground?
Yeah, we're having a lot of fun in television and having a lot of, you know, TV kind of became for a while, and I you know, God bless my brother, and I started the movie business. I love the movies. For a while, TV really became kind of the perfect storytelling medium because you had, and this really started with Dan and David on Game of Thrones for that second season onwards, where HBO, God bless them, got behind physical production values of, well, we'll make it look like a movie. They wound up shooting a lot of the places that we shot in Batman Begins. They were shooting on location, practical photography in beautiful locations, and you saw television could be this very big, very cinematic thing. I mean, Game of Thrones at its height was incredibly cinematic. And inspired by that, Lisa and I looked at that and sort of thought, okay, well, you can take these big swings. And there's no compromises, though we had some challenges getting Westworld, the first season of Westworld, to the finish line. You know, we got to tell the story we wanted to tell. There were very few compromises there.
Yeah, and you look at the scale, you look at the cast. I mean, there's not much difference between, I mean, most films would kill for that kind of...
Chris would beg to differ, but I think that first season is so beautiful. We shot on film. We shot where we wanted to shoot. On that series, we shot in Utah, Singapore, Spain, all around the world, on film. Incredible cast. Really felt for a minute there like completely no compromises medium. But the compromise, of course, is that cinema, the theater, you know, television is always competing for your attention.
Yeah.
And that is challenging. Whereas a movie, the classic model of the theatrical release, you know, you get to put people in a dark box and get them to dream together. And that is uniquely powerful. So I love films. I would love at some point to revisit them. For directing, for me, it was a long road to get there, in part because my brother, you know, sort of claimed that space early. But I got to a point where when I finally started working with directors who weren't my brother, I was like, well, I don't know if I can do what Chris does, but I know that I can do what these guys do.
Right.
And for me, the ability, screenwriting is a little like being paid to write recipes, and you never get to touch the ingredients.
Right.
And you never get to actually cook the meal. And so for me, the complete version of it was this way on Westworld with the pilot and eventually the finale. I directed the pilot for Westworld, and then the finale of the first season was a chance to do the whole thing. Imagine the universe with Lisa, and then with us as producers and me as director, get in there and figure out how on earth we were going to bring that world, haul that world into the light. I mean, that really is the dream, is to have that monastic time, you know, coming up with the universe, and then that incredibly extroverted, social, collaborative time on set, directing, working with incredible actors and incredible artists to kind of put it all together. There's nothing better.
It must be satisfying, again, like little brother syndrome, to find your own path at a certain point. I mean, you had it from the beginning with Memento. You were part and parcel of that. It began with
absolutely.
you, literally.
Yeah.
But that has to get, like, it gets in my head, it gets in any little brother's head to like, oh, I stand on my own 2 feet and I found my own path.
Well, there was the beauty about the pivot for me to television. And that happened in part because I had worked on Interstellar, which came together. I was hired by Steven Spielberg to make that film.
Yeah, that's another conversation I want to have at some point.
Yeah, 100%. But when that project kind of fell apart and Steven had to step away from Paramount, we were at Paramount, I was heartbroken. And I thought, God, I can't spend, I'd gotten into the habit of, you spend a couple of years writing these films for Chris, or working on these films, and there would be something that came out of it. I spent three and a half years working on Interstellar, and all of a sudden it was dead in the water. I said, look, I know a director. I want to make a phone call. But in the meantime, I looked at my wife's experience working in television, the collaborative nature of it, but also the pace of it. You got a fast yes or a fast no, and then you push forward and you create a little bit more. And I thought, more like speed chess. And I just thought, I miss being on set. I miss the idea of, and I don't know if I had it in me to spend 4 more years working on something and not know if it was going to see the light of day.
Right.
Television at that moment was very appealing, and the beauty of being able to work, like I said, Chris and I grew up in different countries, different schooling systems, did not apply to the same colleges. And so for me to be able to find kind of my own medium to work in was also a bit of an opportunity to kind of carve out a little bit of my own identity.
So if and when, and these phone calls, frankly, have probably already come. Kathleen Kennedy, Star Wars, Kevin Feige, Marvel.
No comment.
Any interest in any of those, just from a fan perspective? I mean, you grew up with that stuff, I'm sure.
100%. Look. There's some incredible work that's been done in that space. I think for me, like I said, half my career has been adaptation.
Right.
Half of it's been original. I think the next thing for me is going to have to be something original.
You have that idea. It sounds
I do.
like. And is that going to be feature or TV?
We'll find out.
Okay. To be continued. I got to 10% of what I want to chat with, but we'll have another conversation. Congratulations. Honestly, this show is so bananas in the best possible way. Hopefully we teased it just enough, but we haven't even mentioned the cast, which features the great Walt Goggins and Ella's fantastic. It's
thank you. Aaron Moten, incredible. No, we got lucky with this one. We got some amazing familiar faces and some people who are maybe a little less familiar. We're very excited.
Yeah, and honestly, whether you're a gamer or not, it worked for me, and I've never played the game.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. We were obsessed with the games. You're like, is it going to work for people who haven't watched them? It's so specific. It's almost like an argot, right? It's almost like its own language.
Totally.
I'm thrilled it worked for you.
All right, man. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
And so ends another edition of Happy, Sad, Confused. Remember to review, rate, and subscribe to this show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm a big podcast person. I'm Daisy Ridley, and I definitely wasn't pressured to do this by Josh.